Today, we're going to focus on all of the nitty-gritty things that you need to know to conduct a survey. So we're going to go over how to participate in the Atlas, how to sign up, adopt a grid cell, how to conduct surveys, how to take photographs of bees, how to submit those photos. And then we're going to identify the different kinds of bumblebees that you might see in Missouri. And before we get started, we're just going to go over introductions again. So my name is Katie Lamke. I'm a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society, and I coordinate the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas as well as the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas. So pretty much any of the questions that you have throughout the summer and conducting surveys, you'll be talking to me. Rich, you want to go next with your intro?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society. I direct our bumblebee conservation programs. So I'm based in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm based here and help Katie mostly in a support role and helping her to direct this project. And like Bill mentioned last time, just want to acknowledge this wonderful partnership we have between a couple of nonprofits and a state agency and a university. It's really valuable, and I'm glad that we're all here and can do this work together. And thank all of you for being here tonight and for learning how to participate in the Atlas project.
Hey everybody, I'm Bill White with the Missouri Department of Conservation, and I serve as the branch chief for our community and private land conservation branch. And glad to see so many people interested in this project. I think it's going to help us understand the distribution of the bumblebee species in Missouri and what kind of plants they need for nectar and pollen. And actually, I think we can help redesign some of our mixes to target some of these bumblebees that are in steepest decline. So appreciate everybody joining us. And again, I'm thankful for the partnership that we have put this on.
I'm Casey Berthold. I'm the Missouri State Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. And I'll just say I appreciate everybody being on here tonight. We're excited to be part of this partnership. The information that's gathered here is really valuable, and what our biologists work on a lot. You know, we fly the quail flag or the pheasant flag a lot of times, but it's really about natural community management and understanding how kind of what we do out on the landscapes is really, really key there. And this is a big part of it. So thank you for what you're doing, how you're contributing to this effort. Much appreciated.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jake Swafford. I'm a coordinating wildlife biologist with Quail Forever and Pheasants Forever here in Missouri. I help private landowners and our conservation partners across the state with monarch and pollinator directed conservation programs. And so helping put this kind of habitat that the bees need out on the landscape. Really excited to be involved in this partnership and excited to learn along with you guys how these monitoring and survey efforts can plug into real-time science that's going to help conservation get on the ground.
Hi, I am Debbie Finke. I am with the University of Missouri CAFNR, the College of Agriculture, Food and Natural Resources. We're just very excited to be part of this project and happy to see so many interested and exciting participants too.
Wonderful. And if you have any questions throughout tonight's presentation, feel free to plop them in the Q&A and we will get to those. If you have comments, you can toss them in the chat, but if it is a question, please enter it in the Q&A so that we see it. We will be watching a video today that's about 20 minutes, and there will be, I imagine, a lot of your questions answered in that video. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So everything that we're going to cover tonight is in the participant handbook that you can find on the website. You can download it as a PDF and look at it on your computer. You can look at it right on your web browser, or you can print it out. So don't worry too much about scribbling down notes because everything is already written down for you. And so what we're going to start looking at is how to set up your Bumblebee Watch account, how to adopt your grid cell, what kinds of surveys you can conduct, and then how to submit that data and carry out the survey directly. So the first thing you need, if you don't already have a Bumblebee Watch account, you need to set that up. And to do so, you log on to bumblebeewatch.org, and in the top right corner, there's a sign up button. And when you sign up, it's going to ask you for your name, your email, you're going to create a username and a password. And this is the website where you're going to be submitting all of your data. So once you create your account, it's essentially going to create you a profile. And all of the bumblebees that you observe from this point forward are going to be logged in here. So you can see that I've observed black and gold bumblebees, 2-spotted bumblebees. Bumblebee Watch is going to keep track of all of this for you, and it's pretty fun to watch it grow over time. It's important that you record your username from Bumblebee Watch. Sorry, that's a tough one to say pretty quickly, because you're going to use that when you go adopt a grid cell. So after you've got your Bumblebee Watch account, then you go to MissouriBumbleBeeAtlas.org and choose which grid cell you would like to adopt. So this is a screenshot from today of current grid adoption. So anywhere that's green is a priority zone for us right now, because that means nobody is surveying in that grid cell. A yellow cell, there is at least one volunteer there, but you can still adopt that one. And gray grid cells are no longer available because there's already 5 people that said they're going to survey in that part. In the top left-hand corner of the map, if you have a specific address or park or somewhere that you already know that you want to survey, you can type that in and the map will zoom into the grid cell that you should be adopting. And then below the map on our website is the actual adoption form. So you're going to put in your name, you're going to put in the grid cell you want, your Bumblebee Watch username, and then you'll get a confirmation email saying that you adopted this with a couple of other resources to get you started on planning your surveys. There are 2 different kinds of surveys that you can run for bumblebees. There's going to be point surveys and roadside surveys that we're going to talk about in a second. And after you do your bumblebee survey, you're also going to conduct a brief habitat assessment. And apart from those 2, you can also submit incidental observations. So when we talk about the bumblebee surveys first, the first type that you can conduct, and this is also the preferred type of survey, are point surveys. So to do this, you're going to select an area that's about 1 hectare or 2.5 acres within your grid cell. And it can be anywhere of your choosing as long as you have permission to be on that land and you're following any posted rules and regulations there. The survey is 15 person minutes long, and it's person minutes because if you have more people actively looking for bumblebees with you, you can cut that down. So if there's 2 people surveying, you only have to survey for 22.5 minutes. If there's 3 people surveying, you only have to survey for 15 minutes. You just need a total of 45 person minutes for the survey. So you're going to run your bumblebee survey and then a habitat assessment, and that counts as 1 point survey. You can also do roadside surveys. To do this, you look in your grid cell and you're going to select a stretch of road that's 10 miles long. And then along that 10-mile stretch of road, you're going to conduct 5 surveys. Each one of these surveys is going to be 15 minutes long. And again, this is person minutes. So if you bring 3 people to survey with you, each one of your surveys along the roadside is only 5 minutes long. Your surveys have to be at least a half a mile apart, but it's up to you at what point you stop on that stretch of road. So at each one of your stops, you're going to do 1 bumblebee survey and 1 habitat assessment. So at the end of a single roadside survey, you will have 5 bumblebee surveys and 5 habitat surveys. As you're doing these, make sure that you wear bright colors or safety vests. Make sure that you're parking in a safe location and just stay aware of your surroundings because the risk is a little bit higher when you're surveying on roadsides. So then after you do your bumblebee survey, that's when you do a habitat assessment. And these are not meant to be exhaustive. should take about 15 to 20 minutes or so. And it basically is giving us an idea of the habitat that you're surveying. So the sheet's going to ask you things like, what kind of habitat are you in? Is it an urban area? Is it an agricultural area? Are you in a grassland? It's going to ask for the different types of plants that are flowering, how many plants are flowering. Again, just really capturing a quick snapshot of the survey, the habitat that you're surveying. And then the last thing that we want to mention here are incidental observations. So these do not count towards your required bumblebee surveys. This is just a way for you to submit observations at any point in time, right? Once you start looking for bumblebees, it's sort of like you're catching the bug. You want to do it all the time. So whether you're at your friend's barbecue, or maybe you're just in your backyard or walking the dog and you see a bumblebee, you can take a photo of that and submit it using the Bumblebee Watch app or uploading a photo to the web browser. So when it comes to conducting a survey, you want to start by planning out where you're going to go. And then we're going to have a video, like I said, that explains how to actually conduct that survey, how you swing a net, how you fill out the data sheet. So let's look at first when. So you need to conduct at least 2 surveys in your adopted grid cell, and this can be any time between June and September. So it's between June and September because we're targeting that peak active period of when bumblebees are most active on the landscape. And we know that between June and September is when we're likely to see most of the worker bees out on the landscape. You can conduct surveys that are not in your grid cell. You can conduct more than 2 surveys. The minimum for this project is to conduct at least 2 surveys in the grid cell you adopt, but there's no maximum. When you're choosing a day, you want to choose a day where the temperature is between 60 and 90 degrees. The winds are less than 15 to 20 miles per hour, and it is not raining. If your day is outside of those parameters, try and remain flexible and see if you can go on a different day. Otherwise, it's not very likely that you're going to catch as many bumblebees as you would if you were inside these parameters here. When it comes to choosing a survey area, pretty much anywhere that's public or you have permission to be that has abundant blooming resources is a really good place to go survey for bumblebees. It can be natural areas. Sometimes urban areas have really nice patches of blooms. It can be on public roadsides or right-of-ways. But again, make sure you're following any posted rules and regulations here. A good way to find places to go survey is by using the Google map of grid cells. And when you adopt your grid, this map comes attached in the confirmation email you get. It's also posted on our website. It's also in the handbook. So if you lose the link, it's pretty easy to find again. But this allows you to look at your grid using Google Maps. You can use the search function in the top, and you can type in something simple like park, hiking trail, biking trail, and in that area, it will pop up a whole bunch of different places that might be potential survey locations that you can check out. Another way is by just zooming in automatically to your grid on your own and looking for green areas. Anywhere that's green on the map is usually going to be some sort of natural area or a hiking area or somewhere where it might be a good opportunity to go look for bumblebees. Some good locations to go survey are the natural areas that Missouri Department of Conservation manages. So on their website, they have a function where you can search for natural areas, you can search for hiking or biking trails, bird watching areas, picnics. All of these sites are going to be really wonderful to go survey for because there's going to be more native plants here than you might find in some urban areas or maybe along roadsides where we see a lot of invasive plants. But if you go survey on these lands, we do ask that you complete Missouri's, MDC has a volunteer agreement, and you need to return this to the appropriate area manager. And it's very easy to do. We've got the form linked on the website. The form is also in the handbook. So fill out the form. You basically just have to sign it because you've all attended this training, and return it to whoever is managing the area that you want to go survey. If you need help with that, you can reach out to myself or Bill White, and we'll get you connected with the right person. And then lastly, before you head out to your survey area, you want to make sure that you have all of your materials with you. So you want to bring your data sheets, enough to conduct however many surveys you're planning to run that day, a writing utensil, your insect net, vials. Make sure you're washing your vials with a mild soap and water between your surveys, just to make sure that there's no disease transmission and you're keeping them clean. You can purchase vials, but you can also use repurposed vials that you might just have lying around your house. Small glass jars work, small plastic vials work. You can get quite creative with what you can catch bees in. You'll also want to bring a cooler with crushed ice. We find that crushed ice works the best compared to something like ice packs. They don't seem to chill the bee quick enough. And then you'll also want to bring a camera to take photos of the bees with. A digital camera with a macro setting works best, but a smartphone will also work if that's all you have to work with. You'll also need a GPS unit, something to start and stop your time with, and something to record weather. A smartphone works for all of these, but if you have separate devices for them, that's totally fine too. Another good idea is bringing field guides. So bringing out things to identify the plants with. You can also bring your Bumblebee ID sheet just to help you if you come across something that you're not familiar with. And then lastly, paper maps. There might be some places in the state that are more rural and there's no cell service out there. So make sure you know where you're going and how to get out if you don't have the ability to call somebody. So like I mentioned, we are going to watch a video, but this video was filmed early last year and our data sheets have changed since then. So the data sheets are shown in the video, but we're going to go through the current data sheets right now before the video, just so that you can associate it a little bit better. So this is the Bumblebee survey data sheet. And if you've conducted field surveys before, this will be no problem for you. If you haven't conducted field surveys before, this will also be no problem for you. They're meant to be used by a wide variety of people and skill levels. So you're going to start by filling out your site name, and the site name can be anything. If you're out at your dad's farm, you can write dad's farm. You want to record your latitude and longitude and the date, and then you're going to fill out the grid ID, what type of survey you're running, how many people are surveying with you, and the weather information. And then you're going to record the time that you start your survey, the time that you stop your survey, and again, how many minutes you were looking. So for point surveys, it should be 45 minutes. For roadside surveys, you need a total of 15 minutes per stop. And then you're going to circle your collection method at the end. So we prefer that you capture and photograph all of the observed bees, though sometimes that's not possible and there might be way too many out there and you try and capture the ones that look different. If that was the case, go ahead and circle that one. And then here is where you're going to record the bees as you're photographing them. So there's a space to write down the species, there's a space to write down the host plant, and then your photo numbers, which the video will walk through this part and describe it in more detail. And then there are two sections that you utilize while you're entering your data. So after you've entered it in Bumblebee Watch, you can sort of check off this box here that goes down the left-hand side of the sheet. And that helps you keep track. If you have a lot of bees to enter, if you just check it off, you know you've already done that one. So here's what a data sheet might look like when it's all complete. Right, this person went out, they surveyed Pete's Ranch on June 15th. They were in grid cell 37. They did a point survey. Down at the bumblebees, you can see that they collected one. They're not sure what it was. Let me get my pointer out here. They collected one bumblebee. They weren't quite sure what it was, but they wrote a note. Maybe it's brown belted, maybe it's two spotted. Same with an unknown plant. They didn't know what the plant was, but they took photos, and the note says, the plant photo numbers are on the habitat sheet. So this kind of information helps you when you leave the field and maybe a week goes by and you can't really remember. You took notes of what you still have to figure out before you enter the data. So then after your bumblebee survey is when you do your habitat assessment. And to start the habitat assessment, you fill in the site name, the date, and the survey type. And this matches exactly to the bumblebee data sheet so that you can keep the two associated with each other. This is important, especially if you're doing roadside surveys, because you need to keep those 5 surveys separate, but they're all going to be entered together. So you need to know which bee survey goes with which habitat assessment. The next part of the habitat assessment is looking at the survey area and assessing what type of habitat you're in. So this person was in an agricultural land, and then you look at the surrounding area. So you have three spots here to basically rank the most abundant habitat types around you. So around them, there was more ag land here, so they checked that off, but maybe they could also see grassland. And if you only have one habitat type surrounding you, say you're doing your survey in a prairie and all around your survey area is still prairie, you can just fill out the first most abundant and say grassland. So only one is required, but you can add up to 3. Next, you want to circle the percentage to say how much of the survey area has flowering resources. And here's some examples. So the 0 to 10 here, maybe there's a few things flowering, but there's not very many resources available for bees, whereas a field that's got a lot of flowers and high density, you'd say that's more than 90%. And then the next part of the habitat survey is right up here where we have nest features. So if you see things like bunch grasses or leaf litter, pine needle duff, rodent holes or tunnels, all of these choices here are associated with features that we think bumblebees use to nest in. So if you see any of these, just check them off. And next is management. So for each one of these management practices here, you're going to circle yes that it's present, no that it's present, or suspect in that it might be present. So sometimes if you're in an agriculture field, you might suspect that there's insecticide being used or herbicide if you see some discoloration in any of the leaves. If you see scat or animal prints, you might assume that there's native grazing in the area. And fire, controlled or burned in the survey area. Like, do you see ash on the ground or do you see that blackness? So whatever happened during this season that you can see is what we're trying to assess. And then on the back side of the habitat assessment, you're going to circle how many different plant species excuse me, are in bloom. So here this person saw 3 to 5 different types of plants blooming in their area. And then to the best of your ability, you're going to write down the names of each of those plants that you see. And if you don't know the plant, it's okay to write unknown, and you can take pictures of it and identify it later at home if you don't have a field guide with you. Other things that help with identifying plants are apps like iNaturalist or Seek or Weed ID. I think Weed ID is specific to Missouri. And then at the very bottom, you're going to go over your volunteer data, excuse me. And here you're going to record the time that you started your survey and the time that you stopped your survey. So this is including your drive time, right? So not just the time that you did your survey, but how long did it take you to drive out there and drive back? And you want to record how many miles round trip. So if this person put 120 miles down, that means they drove 60 miles out there and 60 miles back. And then make sure you keep track of the time that it takes to enter your data, because that also counts as volunteer time. But I'll mention that again as we go into the entering part of things. And photographing. This is the last thing we're going to look at before we watch the video. So when you take a photograph, you want to make sure that it includes the front of the face and the top of the head, like this top image here. We can see that that bee has black hairs on the top of its head and the front of its face. And we want to include a photo of the thorax that gets a good angle of the top and the side, because we need to be able to see the colors on all sides of this thorax to identify the bee, as well as any patterns that are on this bee's thorax. Maybe there's a stripe, maybe there's a circle, maybe there's a notch somewhere. And then the tergites. So the tergites are the 6 different sections on the bee's abdomen. So each abdominal section there is called a tergite. So tergite 1 is T1, all the way down to tergite 6, which is T6. And each one of these tergites can have a different color of hair on it. And that's what we use to help identify bees. This entire checklist is on the backside of the bee identification guide that we've made. So don't worry about scribbling all of this down right now. It's already written down for you. And make sure that you check the photos that you're taking while you're in the field. All of these photos here are not ones that we would be able to put a species ID on, because we can't see enough of the bee, or it's too dark, or it's out of focus, or we can't see what's under the wings. And it's okay if your fingers are in photos. Sometimes it helps to move the wings out of the way to get a photo of that abdomen. So don't worry if your little fingers are in the photos, it's okay. All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and bring up the video. And I see there's a few questions here. And a lot of these questions are going to be answered in the upcoming video. Rich, do you want to say anything before I share that?
I think it might be good to answer some questions here. I think a lot of them may not be answered, and I imagine more are going to come up as we go through. So I think it might be worthwhile to spend some time answering some of these.
That sounds good.
Okay. First question, can we do surveys in grids where we did not, in a grid we didn't sign up for, if we're visiting some other part of the state?
Definitely. So the minimum for this project is that you do at least 2 surveys in the grid cell that you adopted. And beyond that, you're welcome to do surveys wherever in the state. And you don't have to adopt those cells. You can just submit data for them.
Can I survey for more than 45 minutes?
You can, but you're going to have to do more than 1 survey. So a single survey is only 45 minutes. But if you want to do more than 45 minutes, you're welcome to do 2 surveys and do 90 minutes. But they have to be recorded separately and submitted separately.
Yeah, and the reason for that is we're trying to make these equal effort so they're repeatable. And so that when we analyze the data, we have sort of clear patterns that we can assess between regions and even between states. How do you determine latitude and longitude?
So if you have a smartphone, if you open up Google Maps, you can hold down where you are on the map and it will drop a pin, and this submits, or it brings up latitude and longitude for you. If that's not the route you want to go, if you log on to the website, we have an explanation of how to find latitude and longitude using the internet and what form it needs to be submitted in. Yeah,
I'll also just say, if you don't have that, it's okay. You don't necessarily need to have it on your data sheet as long as you know exactly where you surveyed, so that when you enter your data in Bumblebee Watch, as long as you drop the pin in the location where you did your survey on the map, and you'll see this in the videos, it will automatically enter the latitude and longitude. So if you're struggling with that aspect of it, please don't let it be a barrier to your participation. That can happen when you enter your data, as long as you know exactly where you were surveying. That's the key point. And you could just mark that on a map and find it again later too. So. In a grass pasture cut for hay, is that considered a grassland or ag land?
I think we put that as ag land, didn't we? We classified that as pasture land and agriculture.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then there's a question, if I'm doing a survey in a very large prairie, do 2 surveys need to be in the exact same location both times, or can they be slightly different locations within the prairie?
They can be slightly different. So you can choose wherever you want to survey. Your surveys can be done in the same location on different days, or you can do them on the same day in different locations. It's really up to you where you conduct your surveys.
And then there's a question about the app and the website. If they've conducted a survey, where are they going to submit their data, in the app or in the website?
On the website. So the app is used for incidental observations.
Yeah.
You want to just take a quick photo. Yeah. But the website is where you submit data.
And then another last question, if I survey with another program participant, do we each do a separate survey?
That is up to you. So if you have both signed up for the project, you will both need to conduct 2 surveys as a minimum. However, you can survey together, but it would only count as one.
But you could have the time in that survey, right? So if you're each doing a survey, as Katie mentioned earlier, they're person minutes. So instead of a 45-minute survey, you would each survey for 22.5 minutes during that survey period. So there are some efficiencies there.
Yeah.
What if I do a survey and I don't see any bumblebees?
Very good question, and that is very important data for you to submit. So if you observe no bumblebees, we still want to know that data. Absence data is just as important as seeing 25 bumblebees.
I think that's it, Katie. Let's move on.
Okay. Get this video up here. Yep, thank you. And again, this video is about 20 minutes. And I just want to mention that it was filmed before Missouri was launched. So it says it's for Pacific Northwest and Nebraska, but it is also for Missouri. Oh boy.
Hey, Katie, I might just remind you that you may want to stop sharing your screen and then start again and click the share computer audio button.
I did do that.
Okay.
Oh, hold on.
Sorry.
Are you seeing that?
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield.
We're seeing your open Internet Explorer or your Windows Explorer.
How to do a survey for the Pacific Northwest Bumble Bee Atlas.
That's it. You got it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Rich Hatfield. I'm a senior conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and I'm here to teach you how to do a survey for the Pacific Northwest Bumble Bee Atlas or the Nebraska Bumble Bee Atlas. They both have pretty much the same survey protocols. So I'm here today. I'm in a beautiful natural area. It's a nice, warm, sunny day. I've got my net and I have some vials in my pocket, so I'm pretty much ready to do a survey. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the site is big enough. It needs to be about a hectare. And a hectare is about the size of a football field, lengthwise, square. So sort of a football long and the same distance wide. It's 100 square meters. So a football field, including the end zones. Another way to think about it is the infield of a track. If you ever ran track, the entire infield on the inside of a running track is about a hectare, or a soccer field is also about a hectare. So you want to make sure it's big enough. And then usually what I do once I decide that it's a big enough site is I walk around and I make sure that there's enough flowering resources. You want to make sure that there is something that bees could be visiting. Otherwise, it's probably not worth really conducting a survey, or maybe come back at a later date when there are flowers. One of the things you want to do when you're out pre-walking your site is make sure you're keeping an eye out for inconspicuous flowers. Sometimes flowers will grow down amongst the grass, but they can be important for bumblebees and often are. This plant is called self-heal and often grows underneath the understory or overstory of grass and is a great bumblebee plant. Another important thing when we're out looking for bumblebees is we want to make sure we're looking at all blooming plants. If I was standing here looking in this patch, I might be drawn to the violets, to the dandelions, or maybe to the bluebells over here. But in reality, one of the most attractive plants in this patch has green, inconspicuous flowers, but bumblebees love it. This is a plant called waterleaf, and the flowers aren't quite open yet because it's still very early in the season here. But these little green guys here are going to bloom into little, beautiful little flowers that hang down sort of under the understory, and they often can't be seen. But bumblebees like Bombus flavifrons and other long-tongued species really love these flowers and will visit them. So while you may not be drawn to them with your own eyes, it's really important to pay attention to what's blooming and making sure that we're spending time looking at all the flowering resources on the landscape, looking for different species of bumblebees. Other things you may want to look for as you're doing a pre-walk around your site are things that may be a potential hazard. You may want to avoid plants like poison oak or blackberry, although it is notable that both of these plants do flower and can be attractive to bumblebees. You'll also want to look out for holes or other things to avoid, like electric lines, fences, barbed wire. Just make sure you're safe while you're doing your survey. You also want to keep an eye out for property lines to make sure you're not crossing from public land onto private land. And also keep an eye out for areas that you may want to spend a couple more minutes, areas with high quality forage that you know are especially attractive to bumblebees. Or keep an eye out for blooming trees, meaning don't forget to look up. There are sometimes flowers that are above your head that can also be attractive to bumblebees. Once you've finished your pre-walk, you're ready to start your survey. Materials that you want to make sure that you have with you before you begin your survey are an insect net, jars to place your bumblebees, a cooler with crushed ice. Make sure you have a timer. And then for processing your bees, you'll need your data sheets as well as a camera. We recommend having a dedicated camera, ideally with a macro function, but in a pinch, a smartphone can work as long as you learn how to control your white balance and take high quality photos with it. I typically set up a station in the middle of my survey area, which has the cooler and the area where I'll process the bees later. And then I grab a handful of vials and head out to go conduct my survey. And when you're conducting your survey, you want to make sure it's 45 minutes long, and that's 45 person minutes. So if you're doing it with a friend, you would do it for 22 and a half minutes. And if you did it with 2 other friends, it would be for 15 minutes. You just want to have 45 total minutes of search time. The important thing also is that when you're doing a survey, you want to pause the timer while you catch a bee. So it's 45 minutes of searching, not 45 total minutes. So you want to pause the timer when you catch a bee, and while you're putting that bee into a vial, and while you're putting that vial into the cooler. That doesn't count for your search time. The other thing that's important while you're doing your survey is you want to make sure that you're associating every bee observation that you have with a flower. So one of the important things about the Atlas project is we want to learn what resources that bees are using. So while you're out collecting bees off of flowers, you want to make sure to record that information so that we can gather it later and use that information when we analyze the data from the project. So with each bee that you capture, you want to also record the flower on which you captured it. Catching a bumblebee in a net is not an easy task. It takes a lot of practice. So one of the things that we recommend is that you spend some time practicing in your backyard before you go out and actually conduct your survey. That way you'll get some competency and some confidence so that when you see a bumblebee during your survey, you'll actually be able to net it. There are really two different ways to go after a bumblebee on a flower. One way is to just swing your net and try to catch it in there like this. The important thing is after you've swung, you want to make sure to turn your net over to close the bottom of it so that the bee doesn't come flying right out into your face. There's a number of ways to do that. I like to do a little flip, but the easiest way to do it is to swing and then just turn the net over 1-2 times. And then you'll have the bee in this section of the net that's laying over the top. The other way to go after a bee instead of sweeping is to just go over the top and drop the net on the bee like that. That way the bee will be trapped in the net. The next step then would be to grab the bottom of the net and pull it up to the top, and the bee will fly right to the top of the net because it's attracted to the sun. Let's see if we can find some bees to practice on. Sometimes you just have to go follow for her a bit. She looks like she's looking for a nest, so they can be really hard to track. But we can just throw the net over the top of them like that sometimes while they're flying. And I got her. I can see her moving in the net there. So what I do is I pull the net then up to the top and make sure she's under there. I see her right in there, and then I can put her in the vial. Okay, so now that I have a bee in the net, what I need to do is get the bee from a net into the vial. And the way I'm going to do that, she's somewhere in this folded over area. I can see her crawling around right here. And so what I want to do is make sure she gets all the way down to the bottom of the net. So what I can do is I can just take the net and just go back and forth a couple of times and then fold it over, and then I like to grab it when I know she's above my hand here. So I know that she's between my hand and the bottom of the net. And then I can take my jar, take the top off, but I want to keep that cap close by. And so then what I do is I stick the jar into the net, and it goes through my hand here, okay, so that there's no way for the bee to get out. And then what I can do is just sort of move the net around until I'm sure that I have the bee in the net. And unfortunately, my net is very dirty, so it's hard for me to see. But I can hear her. I know she's in there. And usually you'll hear that sound when you know she's in your jar. I know that she's in the jar. And now I can just use the net basically as the top of my jar. So I'm just going to reach my hand in, and again, I'm going to grab that plastic vial, and I'm just pulling the top of the net over the top of the jar so the net is still serving as the top until I get to the edge, and then I'm just going to slide it directly into and put the cap directly on, and then I can close the top and I can see the bee there in the jar. And that is how you transfer, or at least one method for transferring a bee from a net into a jar. Okay, so now I want to show you another method for getting a bee from a net into a vial. You can see the bees crawling around in the vial right here, and I'm sorry, in the net right there, and I want to get her into the vial. So one thing is a good thing to do. Some people just aren't comfortable holding the net while they do this, so they like to put it on the ground. But you can see if I hold the net straight up, the bee will fly all the way to the top of the net, okay? And then I can move forward. So some people just like to set it on the ground and then use the ground sort of as the cap, and then stick the vial into the net. And then again, same principle, you can pin the bee against the net as the top, and then you can stick your other hand in there and just put the cap on, and then you'll have the bee in the jar. Simple as that. And then what we want to do is we want to take the bee once it's in a vial, and we're going to put it into the ice pack. And it's ideal to stick it as far into the ice as we can so that the ice is completely surrounding the bee, and then it'll chill very quickly so that we can take the photographs that we need to take. Normally, one of the things that I would do in this situation is I would take the flower that I captured this bee on, and I would put it into the jar so that later when I was processing my bees, I could know which flower that I caught this bee on. And keeping track of that is very important for the data we're collecting for the Atlas project. Or in this case, because this bee wasn't visiting a flower, it was just flying around, it's not going to have any floral association. So if I don't put a flower in there, then I'll know that when I process my data later. But if I'd captured this bee on, say, a dandelion, I could come over to a dandelion flower and just grab the flower off and pretty easily just tuck the flower into the jar with the bee. And then later when I process this bee, I'd have the flower and the bee in the same jar so that I can keep track of it. Other people like to take notes and have a notebook, and they will number their vial and say this would be bee number 1. They could go bee number 1 and they would write down the flower or take a picture of the bee next to the flower. There's lots of different ways to keep track of it. We don't care which way you do it. We just care that you do it. So when I finish my survey, I like to get a station set up to take my photographs. I want to make sure that I have everything I have and everything I need before I get started, because when I take the bees out of the cooler, they're going to start warming up, and I want to make sure that I have everything. So I want to make sure that I have my data sheet and a pencil that has lead in it. So I want to make sure I can take my notes. And I want to make sure that I have my camera. The other thing I like to do is make sure that my camera is set so the pictures I'm going to take are appropriate for the lighting conditions. So I usually will take a cap of a vial or something like that and make sure that I have my camera in the right settings before I get started, so I don't have to wait while the bee is warming up. So I get it in my macro setting and make sure that the pictures that I take look good. So here I am, I'm going to take a picture. And that looks pretty good. You can see here. It looks pretty good. I could probably add a little bit of light. It's a little bit dark, so I may change the white balance a little bit, but for the most part, it looks pretty good. So once I'm ready and I've got the information that I need, I can start processing my bees. But first I want to make sure I've filled out the top of my data sheet. So I have my site name and my grid cell ID in here, along with the date and the survey method, my weather information, and the surveyors and the survey time. All of that's entered on the data sheet, and I can get ready to enter the bees. Now each line on your data sheet here is going to represent a vial. So each bee that you captured gets its own line. So you're going to enter what bumblebee species that you think it is, its host plant, and then the photo numbers that you need, that you took of that bee. I'm going to move and process my bees in the direct sunlight here because it often will take a different picture or a better picture if you have direct sunlight. Sometimes it's too bright. You just have to take a look at the pictures that come out of your camera and adjust your settings and your location appropriately. And I can't stress this enough. I get way too many photos that people took that are out of focus or are too bright or are too dark. And if someone goes through all of this trouble of collecting bees, puts bees in jars and bees in the jars in a cooler, and then takes pictures that doesn't allow me to identify them, a lot of that effort has been wasted. So taking pictures is really the most important thing that you can do. And I want you to make sure to get your settings right and take the time you need to get the best pictures that you can. So I'm ready, my station's all set up, I have everything I need. I can grab my first bee out of the cooler. And once you take a bee out of the cooler, you'll know she's ready to be processed if you can kind of shake the jar back and forth, and she moves pretty freely in there. That's when you know she's ready to be processed. And so usually what I do is I'll just dump her out onto some surface, and if you have white, that's great, it works really well. Other colors can work too. Darker colors, just something that's flat and neutral usually helps pretty well. So one of the things that we can do when we look at our bee, you remember there's a lot of different photos that I need. I need to be able to see the picture of the face. I need to be able to see a picture of the thorax. And I need to be able to see a picture of the abdomen, including all of the segments back there. And for yellow-faced, yellow-striped bees, I need to see a picture of the underside of the abdomen. That allows me to tell the differences between some very close look-alike species. So when they're completely out is a great time to take a picture of that underside of the abdomen if you have that species. And in this case, I do. So I want to get really close if you can, and this is why a camera with a macro setting is really the best option. You want to get as close as you can, and you want to take a nice picture of the underside of the abdomen. Okay, so now I can see the color of those hairs on the abdomen, which is exactly what I need to see. Also, when she's in this position, I can often take a very good picture of the face. And it's nice to take a nice close-up like this, because then I can see the cheek length, as well as the color of the hairs on her face, and the colors of the hair on the top of her head. I also like to include a profile shot, like this. Okay? And one of the nice things about a shot like this is I can see the hairs on the face, on the thorax, and on the abdomen. And now I want to be able to make sure that I can see every single segment on that abdomen and then the color patterns there. So you want to sometimes peel those wings apart and make sure you get a nice clear shot. It's okay if your hand is in there, but we really just want to be able to see all of the segments back there on the abdomen. Perfect. And then she's ready. I've taken all of the photos that I need for her. You can see there that her foot is starting to twitch a little bit and she's starting to wake up. But I've taken all the pictures that I can of her. And so what I can do is I can actually just set her in the sun and let her warm up, and she'll slowly warm up and groom herself and fly away. And then I can go on and process the next bee. But before I do that, I want to make sure I enter this one on my data sheet. So because this has a yellow face and a yellow stripe, and you notice that all the hairs on the underside there were black, I know that this is Bombus vosnesenskii. And if you don't know the species of bee that it is, it's totally fine. You can just write Bombus here. And I'm going to write the host plant. In this case, there is no host plant. I found this bee just flying around, probably looking for a nest site. So I'm just going to write nest searching. And then I want to write the photo numbers. So in my camera here, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to open up, and I'm going to take a look at the photos that I took. And down here, it's going to tell me the number of the photo that I took. And I want to record that information on the data sheet. So these photos started at 2319, and I'm going to write that on here, and that goes through 2324. Okay, and now that's all the photos that I've taken of that bee, and I've entered all the information that I need to from that particular bee on the data sheet. Now I can process my next bee. Again, I can shake the bee in the jar, and if she moves around freely, I know that she's ready to be processed. And dump her out onto the table. And again, this is not a yellow-faced, yellow-striped bee, so I don't need a picture of the underside of the abdomen. I just need a picture that shows the face, head, thorax, and abdomen. And I can get a lot of that from a single shot with this bee, the way that she's set up. I can get a nice profile shot. And there I can see pretty much everything I need to from a single photo. I'm gonna roll her over on her back to make sure that I get a photo of the cheek length and of the face. Sometimes the antennae get in the way there, so you wanna make sure, if you can, to get the photo that you need. Okay? So there, really, with just 2 pictures, I can get everything that I need. But there, in this case, I can also get a nice shot there that'll show me every segment of the abdomen. And this species here is Bombus mixtus. It's got brown hairs at the very back of its abdomen, that little crescent on T2 there. And you can see it's got cloudy hairs on its thorax. So a mix of yellow and black hairs and a nice short cheek. So I'm done processing that bee, and I can put her in the sun as well. So now I can write this one as Bombus mixtus. She was also nest searching. And the photo numbers, again, I go into my camera, I press preview, and this goes through 2327. So this is gonna be 2325 to 2327. One of the things you can do when you're done processing your bees is you can actually hold them in your hands. It's a really neat opportunity to get up close and personal with a bee and see how they move their wings and groom themselves. It's a really, really neat opportunity. But they do warm up pretty quickly, and it's pretty neat to watch them fly away and notice that even after being in a cooler for a long time, they can go out about their business and just fly away. Oh, there she goes. When you're done with your bumblebee survey, we're going to ask that you also do a brief
Okay, let's see what questions we have. We're conducting a survey.
There's a couple. One about how do you keep from getting stung when you're capturing the bee and then transferring the bee from the net into the jar? There was a question about that.
Yeah, so a bee will obviously be agitated when it's in the net, but if you're careful in the ways when you're putting it from the net into the vial, there's not a huge likelihood that you'll get stung unless you grab exactly where the bee is in the net. So if you know where the bee is and you make sure to place your hands around where she is in the net, you probably won't get stung transferring it. Do you have anything to add there, Rich?
No, I don't. I mean, sometimes if the net sort of droops over your arm and the bee can be in there and she could sting you through the net as well. But I'll say that I've been doing this a long time, 23 years now. And, I've been stung probably, I'm certainly not counting on my toes yet. I'm still counting on my fingers. So it's not that common. I've handled thousands of bees, and you just have to be quiet and calm. I think that's the most important thing, is just realize that, they're not comfortable, but they're not aggressive either. They're not, it's not in their nature to just sort of sting you. So just be calm and find a procedure that works best for you, and practice helps. The only other question in here was, how long can the bees survive on ice? A lot of people have had that question.
Yes, good question too. So there have been bees that have been accidentally left overnight that have been okay. So for the surveys, when you're going out and they're maybe in the cooler for 45 minutes to an hour, they are going to be okay. So just make sure that when you're done with your survey that you photograph all those bees and release them on site. Hopefully there should be no mortality involved.
Yeah, and just to clarify that a little bit, I was on a team that helped develop the survey protocol for the rusty patch bumblebee throughout the range. And the length of time that we came up with there is around 2 hours, is a good sort of maximum time frame to think about. And that should work if you imagine that you did a survey where you went out and the first bee that you caught, say was, well, it doesn't matter what bee it was, you caught it, and then it happened to be the last bee that you processed. So you caught it and then finished your survey for 45 minutes, and then you were processing bees for, a half hour or something like that. It could end up being an hour and 15 minutes, but that's certainly well within the comfort limits for these bees. As Katie mentioned, several hours would be completely fine.
You're on mute.
Yeah, a few more questions have come in. Let's see. Oh, they're not questions, they're more stories. Could you wear protective gloves like nitrile gloves to protect not only the bee, but yourself?
Nitrile, is that the like elasticy thin gloves?
Not really familiar. My feeling would be if you wear gloves, you're more likely to injure the bee and get injured, would be my thinking. You're just going to lose that touch. So I would recommend against it, but if it makes you feel better and more comfortable, and makes you more likely to contribute, then yeah, wear gloves. Whatever makes you feel comfortable would be my answer. Let's see. We could certainly consider some training sessions, and we can talk about that maybe later.
Yeah, I do have one to mention that Missouri Prairie Foundation is putting on. I have a slide for it at the end of this, but if conditions clear up and we are able to host in-person events, we would certainly like to get together and hold training sessions. Usually we do deliver these trainings in person, and it gets people a lot more comfortable with handling bees and really lets you understand that gloves are not necessary and you don't get stung because you recognize that they're not aggressive creatures. We're just sort of disturbing them for a second by putting them in a net. So if we do hold in-person events, you'll hear about them. We'll send out an email.
Yeah, I would also encourage you just to stay active in the Facebook group. We'll probably announce some of these smaller group meetings there. So yeah, stay tuned. We hope to do some in-person stuff as COVID conditions clear up and people continue to get vaccinated and rates drop. That'll open up some opportunities for us to be in person, which is, believe me, much more enjoyable than staring at Zoom. I think you should move on, Katie.
Okay. Get the screen shared here.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'll just say there's a question here about time of day. As long as you're within those sort of temperature windows and weather windows, you should be good. But generally, bumblebees kind of run bankers hours. 9 to 5 is a pretty good time. Maybe 10 if you've got a cool morning. But on really hot days, you may want to target the earlier part of the day when it's a little bit cooler. They do shut down if it gets too hot. So that's what I would say. And generally, the bees need to be on ice. Depends on the cooler and a lot of things and how warm it is outside, but 5 minutes is 5 to 10 minutes is generally a pretty good estimate there. And there's a question here about holes in the vials. I would not put holes in the vials. There's certainly enough oxygen in there to keep a bumblebee happy for a long time, especially if it's in a cooler. In the sunlight, different story. I would, if I was going to be in the sunlight, put holes in it to keep it cool. But in a cooler, I wouldn't, just because that's an avenue for water to get into the vial. And then you're going to end up with a wet matted bee, which are very difficult to take photos of and very difficult to identify. I think that's it, Katie.
Okay. So now we're going to move into identifying Missouri's bumblebees. And bumblebee identification, if you've learned about identifying birds or identifying plants, it's similar, right? There's certain features that we look for that help us distinguish one species from another. And before we talk about Missouri species, we have to talk about lookalikes. What are the other insects that are flying around out there that you might think is a bumblebee? So here's the process. It's sort of a map, if you think about it that way. When we have an insect, our first job is to figure out if it's a bee or not. And there are quite a few flies that mimic themselves to look like bees, right? Because it gives them a little bit more protection. If their predator thinks that they are a stinging insect, they might be less likely to get eaten. On this photo, on this collage here, there's actually only one bee. And it's this one right here, little Bombus Variabilis. So as you're out swinging a net, just be aware that there are going to be some tricky insects out there. To distinguish a bee and a fly, some of the things you can look for are first the number of wings. Bees are going to have 4 wings and flies are going to have 2. Bees, they have little hooks on their forewing and their hind wing that hold them together, sort of like Velcro. It gives them more power in flight. So it can be a little bit tricky to see the 2 sets of wings on a bee, but if you have it up next to you, you'll be able to see that there are 4 wings. You can also look for pollen loads. So bumblebees have that corpicula or the pollen basket on the hind leg, where it's sort of that triangular smooth area on their hind leg that they pack a whole bunch of pollen into. Flies are not going to have that, right? They're not actively collecting mass amounts of pollen to bring back to their home. So if you see a pollen basket, you've got a bee. Next, you can look for hairs. Bumblebees are very hairy bees. A lot of our flies are not hairy. Of course, as we saw in that first mimic slide, there are some species that have a lot of hair on them. Antennae. Bumblebees will have long antennae, and flies usually have short, stubby antennae. There are, of course, fly exceptions that have some longer antennae, but in that case, you can use other characteristics, like if you see a bunch of hair, if you see that pollen basket, you've got a bumblebee rather than a fly. The last thing you can look at are the eyes and the position and the size of them. So when we think about insect vision and the way that it's portrayed in a lot of cartoons, right? Insects have those really big, buggy eyes. They see in all the hexagons. So flies have these really large eyes on the side of their heads that almost meet at the top of their head, whereas bumblebees do not. So you can see that there's a pretty big gap on the top photo where those, let me get the pointer out here. These are the bumblebee's large compound eyes right here, but you can see they don't touch. Whereas the fly, these red things are its eyes and they're almost touching at the top of its head. Another one to be aware of are wasps. And wasps don't look too much like bumblebees, but when you're out swinging a net at things that are visiting flowers, you might go after a wasp because it's moving on a flower. I've done it before. Some things to look for here are just the overall body shape. So wasps are going to be a lot thinner. They're going to look a little bit tougher. They hold their wings different. They have them folded a lot of the time. Wasps aren't going to have that pollen basket on their hind leg. They're not collecting a lot of pollen, but they might be foraging and collecting nectar and drinking that up. They're not going to be very hairy, and a lot of the color that we see on wasps actually comes from coloration that's directly on their exoskeleton. And the exoskeleton is basically like a bee's skin, if you will. It kind of feels like a fingernail. So their color is directly on the exoskeleton, whereas a bumblebee, the color patterns that we see come from hair colors. So the next step here, after we've figured out that we have a bee, is to figure out if it's a bumblebee or some other kind of bee. If you have a different kind of insect, you can go to bugguide.net. There's a lot of different images on there that can help you figure it out. iNaturalist also works very good for this. You can upload an image and somebody can help you identify what it is. Some other bees that you might confuse with a bumblebee would be a honeybee. These ones are a little bit smaller, though not always, than bumblebees. They have a torpedo-shaped abdomen, and they're usually that black, orange, honeyish color. Bumblebees and honeybees are relatives, so they're both going to have big pollen baskets on their hind legs. The last thing that honeybees have that bumblebees don't is the younger ones have very hairy eyes. So if you manage to get up close and personal with a honeybee, you might see that there are hairs on the eyes. And carpenter bees. This is probably the one that most people get confused with a bumblebee because they're about the same size, they're about the same colors, they both have that large buzz. On the top row, we have two photos of a bumblebee. On the bottom is the carpenter bee. So to tell the difference between a bumblebee and a carpenter bee, you want to first look at the abdomen. Bumblebees have a very hairy abdomen, and carpenter bees do not. They have a very shiny, smooth abdomen. It almost has an iridescent sheen to it. And then you want to look at the hind leg. Bumblebees have a pollen basket, right? It's a hollowed out groove there. It's shiny. There's no hairs in one portion of it. Carpenter bees are going to have scopy, those really dense, specialized hairs. It looks like there's a brush on its hind leg. So once we've figured out that we have a bumblebee, we can go on to the next step in figuring out if it's a male or a female. Because the key that we've made is for female bumblebees. And this is because the time that we're going out surveying, most of the bees that we're collecting are going to be female worker bees. So to tell apart a male and a female bee, first, just their overall appearance. Female bees are pretty much constantly foraging and collecting pollen, so they're constantly grooming themselves. They have a really neat look to them. Male bumblebees do not partake in collecting pollen, right? They have a little bit more shaggy appearance. Sometimes this comes from longer hairs that they have. The other thing to look at is the hind leg. If you see that pollen basket or that triangle on the back leg and you've got a female, if there is no pollen basket, then it's probably a male. It could be a cuckoo bee though. Next is the number of segments. So male bumblebees have a slightly longer abdomen because they have an additional segment. And the way that you can tell segments apart is by looking at those breaks in the color. So you can see on the female bee, let me get that pointer out here, you can see there's a yellow stripe, an orange stripe, another orange stripe, yellow one, and then two black. So each of these different color breaks are different segments that make up the bee's abdomen. So females have 6 segments and males have 7. And not that you need to go count those, but if you see a bee that has a slightly longer abdomen, it might be a male. Males also have slightly longer antennae sometimes. This isn't always, but some of our male bees have slightly longer antennae than the females because they have an extra segment. And eyes. Sometimes the males have enlarged eyes. You can see in the comparison here, they're a little bit more bulbous than the females. And then the last thing that you can look for that's an easy clue is if there is a stinger present. The stingers are usually very easy to see. They're coming out of the last abdominal segment on the females, but males do not have a stinger. And this is because a stinger is basically a modified egg laying mechanism, right? So males don't have them. The thing to be aware of though is that whether the bee has a stinger or not, like it's not trying to come out and attack you. You can see that there's a kid here holding a female bee that's still busy foraging on the flower. So try not to be too frightened of the bees. I know that we've been trained through the years to be a little bit scared of bees, but they're not out to get us. Okay, so now that we know we've got a female bee, the next thing we want to look at is whether it's a female or a female cuckoo bee. And to tell the difference between cuckoo bees and regular bees, you can look at the hairs on the abdomens. Cuckoo bees, they almost look like they're balding. They have some really sparse spots on their abdomen that are just sort of hairless. The other thing, I know these photos aren't super clear, but is the hind leg. So female cuckoo bees do not have a pollen basket, right? Because they're not out collecting pollen. They're invading the nest of a regular bumblebee, and those worker bees are going to collect the pollen for her. So she has no need to have a pollen basket. And then once we know that we've got a female, whether it's regular or a cuckoo bee, that's when we can start using the Bumblebee ID guide here. So the way that this is broken up is into two sections. The bees on the left-hand side are bees where the abdominal segment, the first one is yellow. So if T1 or tergite 1 is yellow, you've likely got one of the 6 bees on the left-hand side. If the first segment is black, then you've likely got one of the 4 bees on the right-hand side. The one at the bottom in the gray patch, the rusty patch bumblebee, is there because there's historic range in Missouri, but it's a very unlikely event that you'll collect one of these. On the back side of the ID sheet is, again, that list of what needs to be included in your photographs, as well as some advice for lookalikes. If you catch, there's a few species in Missouri that look similar to each other. So we've put some ID clues on there to help you distinguish them, as well as what photos you need to collect if you gather one of these bees. And then you need to be aware of bumblebee variation. So even within species of bumblebees, there can be variation. The males can look different from the workers, and they can look different from the queens. And this can be color pattern, it can be in size. But luckily, we know when the periods of activity are for each of these members, right? The queens are active early, the males are active late. So a lot of the bees that we're going to be encountering during our surveys are female worker bees, which is what the ID guide reflects. So when we identify a bee, the things that we're looking at are the hair colors. So first you want to look at the head and see what are the colors on the front of the face and what are the colors on the top of the head. Next, you want to look at the thorax and see if it's all yellow or if it's black, or if maybe there's a mixture of black and yellow. You want to look and see if there's any patterns. Sometimes bees will have a circle in the center, sometimes they'll have a stripe between the wings. Just look and see what colors and what color patterns you're seeing. And then you want to look at the colors on the abdominal segments. So again, each segment is called a tergite, or T1. So this tergite here, the first one, tergite 1, T1, all the way down to T6. So each of these segments can be a different color, and we use the color patterns to identify each bee. So the first bee that you might come across, which is a very common and abundant species, is the common eastern bumblebee, or Bombus impatiens. The hairs on the front of this one's face are black. On the top of its head, it's yellow. On the thorax, it's mostly yellow, but in the center, there can be a black circle or sort of an upside down teardrop shape. The key one for this is that T1 or tergite 1 is all yellow, and the rest of the abdomen is black. Again, this is a very common species. Then we have the two-spotted bumblebee, or Bombus bimaculatus. This one can be confused with Bombus impatiens, or the common eastern that we just looked at, but this species has a little bit more yellow coloration on the second abdominal segment. So the thing to look for in Bombus bimaculatus is that yellow W shape on T2. And sometimes it can be very pronounced, like we're seeing here. This is a very nice pattern, but sometimes it can be a little bit smaller than that. So if you see that distinct W shape, you've got the two-spotted bumblebee. This is one of the earlier emergers. There should be workers out flying around from this species right about now. Next is the brown-belted bumblebee, or Bombus griseocollis. This again is a really common species, found all across Missouri and then some. The hairs on this bee's head are black, both on the front of the face and the top of the head. It's got a yellow thorax with a black circle in the center. And the character for this one is the color and the pattern on T2. So tergite 2 is usually a brown crescent, sort of like a half moon shape on this bee's segment. It can be a yellow crescent. Sometimes it's a large crescent and goes almost all the way across the entire abdomen. Sometimes it's a small crescent and is only in the center. The other nice thing about this bee is that it has very short and even hairs, like it just got out of the groomers. So if you see the crescent and really nice short hairs, you've probably got a brown-belted bumblebee. Then we have the half-black bumblebee, or Bombus vagans. Again, this one is similar to the last couple, right? It has yellow on both the first and second abdominal segments. The difference is for vagans is that that second abdominal band is yellow all the way across. So there's no W pattern, there's no crescent pattern. It's a solid stripe all the way across the abdomen. This one also has long, uneven hairs, so it's easier to differentiate between the brown-belted and the half-black. Then we have the Southern Plains bumblebee, or Bombus fraternus. This one has black hairs on the front of its face and the top of its head. There's a black stripe in between the wings, and the remainder of the thorax is yellow. And then there's yellow on T1 and T2. So the first two abdominal segments are yellow. And it's special because these ones almost look like they're greased back, like somebody took some gel and took those hairs on the abdomen and just wiped them back. They lay very, very flat against the abdomen. This is one of the species of conservation concern. It is in decline in parts of its range, though last year, in the month and a half or so that people were surveying for the Atlas, there were observations of it. So we're excited to see if more come in from across the state this year. Then we have the American bumblebee, and this one is called Bombus pennsylvanicus. Again, it has black hairs on the front of its face and the top of its head. There's yellow in front of the wings and then black behind the wings. There can be a little bit of yellow mixed in behind the wings there. The key thing for this species is that the first segment usually has half black and half yellow. It's a little bit tricky to see here, but this first segment is actually half black and half yellow. And that's a really key feature when trying to distinguish it from, from this species, the black and gold bumblebee, or Bombus oricomis. So this species has yellow hairs on the top of its head and has a very similar color pattern other than that to the American bumblebee. They both have yellow in front of the wings. They can have yellow mixed in behind the wings. T2 and 3 are yellow, just like they were on the American bumblebee. So for distinguishing these species, it's really key to get a picture of the hairs on top of the head. For the black and gold bumblebee, they're going to be yellow. For the American bumblebee, they're going to be black. And again, that half black, half yellow pattern on the American bumblebee is key to look at. The next species is the yellow bumblebee, or Bombus furbidus. This one's got black hairs on its face, but then the rest of its body is pretty much covered in yellow hairs. It has a narrow black band between its wings and black towards the end of the abdomen. And what's interesting about this one is that there's only been a handful of records of this bee observed in Missouri, but when habitat suitability models are run, or when we try and find areas where this bee might exist based off of what we know about the landscape, Missouri always pops up as a place for the yellow bumblebee, yet we don't really observe it too frequently. Late last year, though, there was an Atlas participant that submitted 2 observations that might be the yellow bumblebee, but we didn't have enough detail in the photos to confirm that. So we're hoping that more people observe this, or we get some clearer photos that it was maybe just the American bumblebee, because they can look very similar to the males. So male American bumblebees have a lot more yellow on them than the females. And the way to tell them apart is by looking at the sides of the thorax. So the yellow bumblebee is going to be pretty much pure yellow on the side of the thorax, whereas the American bumblebee is going to have black hairs intermixed on the side. So if you look at these 2 photos, you can see that the American bumblebee on the right-hand side has much more black mixed in on its thorax than the yellow bumblebee. There are a couple more things that we can use to differentiate them. The hairs on the front of the face. The American bumblebee, at least for the males, will have yellow hairs mixed in, and the yellow bumblebee will only have black hairs. The side of the thorax I just covered. And lastly, the tip of the abdomen. American bumblebees, the males will often have a small orange patch on the tip of their abdomen. So all the way down at T7, there might be some orange. So if you see that, make sure you take a photo of it so that we can confirm if it's a yellow bumblebee or an American bumblebee. And there are, these things are all written down on the back of the ID sheet if you forget. There's also a lemon cuckoo bumblebee, or Bombus citrinus. And this one has a pretty much all yellow thorax, even between the wings. There's a little bit of yellow on the sides of T1 that you can see in this photo here. Where's the pointer at? Up here, there's just a little bit of yellow. And then T3 often has some form of yellow. You can see that in both of these photos. And again, this is a type of cuckoo bee, so they're not super abundant, but you could come across one. And then there's the variable cuckoo bumblebee, or Bombus variabilis. This one has not been observed in a long time, but its range is within Missouri. So if you find a bee that's got a yellow thorax with black, predominantly on the sides of its thorax, and then the abdomen, for at least for females, is all black, you can see that it gets its name variable cuckoo bumblebee based off of the color pattern of the males there. There's a lot of different ways that it could display yellow. This one is a species of conservation concern. Unlikely that it will be collected, but again, if it is collected, it will be quite exciting. And the last one that we want to touch on is the rusty patch bumblebee, or Bombus affinis. This one's got black hairs on the front of the face and the top of the head. The thorax is mostly yellow. It can have a stripe or a circle between the wings. T1 will be yellow, and on a queen, T2 will be yellow, but the workers will usually have a rusty patch. So there will be dark orange or brown, sort of surrounded by yellow on that second abdominal segment. This species is federally protected under the US Endangered Species Act, and I don't think it's been collected in Missouri since 1998 or so. So permits are not required to collect in this part of the state because it is considered an unoccupied area by this bee. However, if you are surveying in grid cells 40, 42, 49, 57, or 58, we do urge that you exercise caution and know how to identify this bee. In the chance that you come across this, which again, is very unlikely, but in the chance that it happens, we're going to need you to stop serving and we will have to notify the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So for bumblebee identification guides, there are a couple free ones. The identification guide that we made for this is online. There's also Bumblebees of the Eastern United States is a downloadable PDF. The fold out for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee, Bee Spotter has one. The Bumblebee Watch app helps you identify bees. And then the one in the center there, Bumblebees of North America, is a really wonderful comprehensive book that you can purchase. It's got a lot of information about bumblebees. And then lastly, I just want to mention that the Missouri Prairie Foundation is going to be holding a survey date on Saturday, June 5th, which I believe is National Prairie Day. So if you want to go out and practice swinging nets, filling out data sheets, getting up close and personal with bees, taking photos of them, there is a group going out there to Drover's Prairie, which I believe is an hour or so south of Sedalia, Missouri. But you can check it out. You can log on to moprairie.org and sign up for that. It will be a great experience. Doug Helmers, who's one of their board members, he was part of the Atlas last year. He conducted some surveys, had a great time. So now he wants to put this on to give people a chance to go out and practice. And with that, I think we can take any questions that people have for BID. And the link for the Facebook page is up there too. Again, if you want to stay in touch with other volunteers or find other people to survey with or share stories or questions, the Facebook page is a great place to do that. It's a closed group just for Atlas volunteers. Let me pull up the questions here. There's
a
from
couple questions,
Okay.
none really about ID, but there's one person was confused about whether they should be collecting and reporting cuckoo bees or not.
Yes, so we are collecting and reporting cuckoo bees. It's just not as common that you'll collect them. There is certainly opportunity to, and I hope that you come across cuckoo bees. But you're more likely to catch worker bumblebees while you're out there.
What would be an average time for completing a survey, taking into account stopping the timer to capture bees and completing the survey? So I assume that means taking photos and stuff like that. What's the average time?
Yeah, of course, that would depend on how many people are out there surveying with you. But if it's your first survey and you've never done any of this before, I would say set aside about an hour and a half. You know, you're going to have time to go out in the field, catch the bees, learn how to put them in vials, learn how to photograph them. But as you carry on, it gets a lot more streamlined because you're familiar with how to handle the bees, how to swing a net, what kind of information you need. So set aside more time in the beginning, like an hour and a half or so, to conduct that first survey.
I think I'd say an hour and a half is pretty ambitious personally.
Okay.
It takes me a while to process and take photos. I think that can be really time consuming, depending how many bees you catch. If you only get a couple, then it's not going to be a big deal. But sometimes you might be in a site that has 20, 30 bees, and taking those photos for me can take as much time as the survey. So I'd say 2 hours is a good place to start, and then you may get more efficient as you move on.
Yeah, if you're in a place with that many bees.
Yeah.
Which hopefully you find yourself in.
Yeah. There's a question about the time frame of the project.
So the survey season is going to go from June until September. And then afterwards, we will take a look at that data, start doing some analysis on it. And then we'd like to get another survey season next year. And I think, do you have any more to add to that, Rich?
No, I mean, I would just say, yeah, June, July, and August basically are or are you going through September? I can't remember.
September,
Katie.
yeah.
Yeah, June through September is the survey window for this coming year. Yep.
Yep.
And then last question here that's in the Q&A is that both surveys need to be in the same spot within the grid.
No, they do not. You don't have to survey the same spot twice. If you want to, sometimes that can be helpful to get different snapshots of the same spot. So if you do one in June and then you do another in July, it's nice to see how that site has changed, but you certainly do not have to do your surveys in the same spot.
Question about how someone might connect with another person who has maybe more experience. What would be the best way to connect with another volunteer?
I would use the Facebook group for that. Just jump in there and see if anybody wants to connect or has run a survey or will be running surveys near whatever grid cell you're in. Or attending that Missouri Prairie Foundation. I'm not sure what their safety parameters are for that, but if it's something that you're comfortable doing, that might be a good place to get some hands-on experience.
Do you have a link or anything for that, Katie? Someone's asking for more information about that.
Yeah, I think I put one. Let me stop my screen share here.
Is there one on the link page here?
There is.
Oh, here it is. I got it.
You got it.
Yeah. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here that has more information about the in-person event that Katie was mentioning. Question about how many years the Missouri Bumble Bee Atlas will operate.
Currently unknown. That's a hard one to say, but it started August of last year. We have this survey season for sure. Hopefully enough volunteers will want to keep doing it that we can continue into the future. And, if we gather some really nice data that helps improve conservation, that makes it a little bit easier to try and gather support for continuing the survey effort into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the hope here is, and I think we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but there's just a real paucity of information about invertebrate populations out there. We know so much more about birds and mammals in terms of monitoring their populations. So one of the hopes of doing Atlas projects like this is setting up, a long-term monitoring project. So the hope is somewhat that once we set up the structure and get a bunch of people trained in Missouri, that it will just continue into perpetuity and people will continue to do this, maybe not everywhere, but in a bunch of key places. And I think particularly there are opportunities to collaborate with the Missouri Department of Conservation here. And I don't know if Bill wants to chime in and say something about that, but I know they're interested in monitoring bumblebees on their lands, and there may be ongoing opportunities there. Is glass preferred over plastic for a vial?
I would say go plastic if you can first. It seems to chill the bees a little bit quicker. It's safer when you go out into the fields. You don't have to worry as much about your vials breaking. But if glass is the only thing you had, you can certainly use it.
Let's see here. Do we want information on carpenter bees or just bumblebees?
We're looking for just bumblebees, but if you submit a carpenter bee on accident, it's okay. We'll let you know. But we're just looking for bumblebees.
If they sign up for a grid cell, is there any way they're going to get the contact information for the other people in that grid cell?
So we're not going to provide you with the direct contact information, but if you join that Facebook group, you can reach out and see if anybody else is in that group that has that grid cell that would like to meet up or something of the likes.
Yeah, I'll just say this is one thing that we lose by doing these surveys or events via Zoom, right? Normally we'd be in a room that would be regional, and most of you would live fairly close to each other, and there would be opportunities to connect at breaks and other things. But unfortunately, we lose that. It's nice that you can do this from the comfort of your home, but we lose those opportunities to connect. So we do hope that the Facebook group can be an opportunity for this to happen, and then would encourage you that even if you've come to one of these trainings, if you want to connect and we end up doing an in-person event close to you, then come, and it's a chance to connect with other people. I think that's one of the sort of ancillary benefits of projects like this, is growing a community of people that like to do the same thing and are interested in them and have similar interests. So yeah, hopefully we can do some in-person events as this project moves on. Let's see, we're getting...
This one about, can you submit 4 surveys? Absolutely. You can submit way more than 2 surveys if you have the capacity to. And if you do once a month, we will be sending around information as the survey season gets closer about Atlas Blitz dates. So there will be one weekend each month where we're encouraging all Atlas participants to go out and conduct a survey. So this will include Nebraska, California, Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Missouri, everyone that's participating in an Atlas. We're going to encourage them to go out once each weekend. So if you want to participate in all 4 of those, that would be fantastic. Or one of those.
There's someone who wants to see the grid map again, and someone else that wants to know how to adopt a grid. So I wonder if you just want to share your screen and go to the website, Katie, and show someone how they might adopt a grid cell. Just go through real time and show what that looks like for somebody.
Yeah, let me pull up a window here. Sorry, my mouse is being a little bit slow right now.
It's okay. While you're doing that, I'm just going to address some of these other questions. There's a question about when you'll get to see the results. We, at the end of the year, will try to identify all the bumblebees, and we'll put a report on the website. There's a report on there now from 2020. I will put the link in the chat here, and we'll keep you updated also throughout the course of the season. If you adopt a grid cell, it means that we have your email address, and we'll send out weekly updates about what's going on and sort of what we're seeing with bumblebees and share data throughout the season. But then we'll do an end of year summary at the end. Go ahead, Katie.
Okay. So once you're on the Atlas page, you can pan over to Get Involved, and then you'll see Adopt a Grid Cell. So you click on that, you can scroll down, and you'll find the adoption map. So again, the green areas are areas where we would like people to adopt first, because this means that there's nobody surveying in these cells. Yellow cells means there's at least one person surveying in that grid, and gray cells means there's already 5 volunteers, so we've closed those off. You can use this search bar here to type in a city. So maybe you want to go to Sedalia, Missouri, and it'll zoom in and it will show you which grid cell you're in. So you can zoom in and out of the map. And you can see that you're in grid cell 45. So then if you scroll beneath the map, here's where you adopt it. So I would put in my name, my Bumblebee Watch username that I have already set up, my email address, my zip code, and then which grid cell I want to adopt. And from the map, I said I wanted 45. I'm 18, yes. Yes. I acknowledge that I'm registering as a volunteer, yes, and then hit submit. And when you hit submit, it will say that you have successfully adopted your grid cell, and you'll get a confirmation email that says what grid cell you adopted and a link to that Google map. If you lose the link to the Google map, we have it linked right above the map here. So you can just click on it and it will load with all the grid cells that you can then zoom in and out of and search for different places to go survey.
Hey, Katie, while you're on that page, could you go back to the Google? Could we just show the volunteers or the participants here how they could copy the map to their own? Because they can't edit this map, and someone might want to actually edit this or export a KML file. Would you just show them how they could do that if they wanted to?
So if you hit these 3 dots up here, you can click copy map and you can name it whatever you want. And then it will create a copy. Wait for it to load here. And then you can actually edit this map, right? You can go in and drop points somewhere. You can add a layer to it. You can add a marker, say, this is where I like to survey. Oops, sorry, there we go. You can change the name of the point and save it, and it adds it directly to the map. So if you have a specific location that you want to keep navigating to, you can pull it up on here. You can get directions to this point. It's pretty handy, and you can access this right on your phone.
There's a question here about how to get latitude and longitude if they're in an area where there's no cell phone service. And I will just answer that. If you have a smartphone, which it sounds like you do, there's a separate, or most cell phones at least, have a separate GPS unit in them. So if you open Google Maps, the map may not load, but you will still see a blue dot on that map, and the map will be sort of blank. And if you follow the same procedure that Katie suggested earlier of long pressing on that blue spot where you are on the map, it will still bring up the latitude and longitude. It will not show the map because it won't be able to load. You won't be able to get data, but the GPS unit in the phone will still provide the latitude and longitude.
The other thing that you can do to get around that, which Rich mentioned, is when you go to submit your sighting, you can enter your location here. So maybe you went to Two Creeks Conservation Area. That's Canada. Why is it not coming up? If you know about where you went surveying, you can pan right on the map in Bumblebee Watch. You can flip it to satellite. You can find where you went surveying and say, oh yes, I went right in this field. You can double click and it will auto populate the latitude and longitude for you.
Question about going on to conservation properties for this. I assume these are MDC lands that you're talking about, Sharon. Here, generally, yes, but we talked about a procedure that you're going to have to go through to get permission to survey on MDC lands. And well, maybe, I don't know if Bill could pop in and address that real quick, or Katie, maybe you know off the tip of your tongue the best way to do that. I'm not remembering right now.
Yes, you can go in the back of the participant handbook, and there's some instructions in there on how to do it. But essentially, you need to contact the area manager and get a volunteer form signed off on. It's got a few caveats in it that you're going to follow the protocols for the Bumblebee Watch and release bumblebees back to the site where you're collecting. You're not going to drive 5 miles away to a picnic table and process your bumblebees. So as long as you go through that procedure to contact the area manager, and there's a link in the participant handbook that shows you a map with the areas, conservation areas on it. If you click on that particular conservation area that you're interested in, it'll bring up a page for that conservation area, and there's a contact phone number on there. So Katie's bringing up the website.
Yeah, so when you click, I'll just do that again. On the training packet, so under resources, we have a training packet here. You can find the volunteer form linked that you can fill out. And then if you scroll down to survey location resources, you can click on Missouri Department of Conservation Land, scroll down to natural areas, and it brings up a map for you. Oops, map disclaimer. And again, you can look directly for areas that are near you. Click on one. Tells you the county, more info. That one doesn't want to load. There's a separate map here for the area manager. Oh. Here we go. Bird watching areas. Let's look for hiking, biking trails, the natural area. I think natural area should cover all of these. So then you can hit find your place. And it brings up a list for you. Tells you a little bit about them. And then you'll just have to contact the area manager that oversees this.
If you go down to the bottom of that page where the individual areas are listed, you click on that area.
Click on the area?
Yeah, click on the area, and it should bring up an information page on the area. There, and then there's, see down there at the bottom of that right-hand column for more information. That's how you get a hold of the area manager.
And all of these managers know about the Atlas. They're waiting for people to call and hoping that they are going to be volunteers coming out to survey. We just want to know how many people are going out to these areas, why they're swinging nets, that kind of thing. And I did see someone ask earlier about plant ID resources. So again, if you go into the training packet here and scroll down, we've linked a few different plant identification resources specific to Missouri.
There's a lot of questions popping up about other places they could survey besides MDC lands, DNR, federal lands, Missouri State Parks, Missouri Prairie Foundation, other questions like this. I would just say the best practice here is to check with the land manager, and it might be a phone call or just stopping by an office and letting them know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think generally there won't be barriers to doing this. Certainly on Forest Service lands, on federal lands, you should be fine to conduct these surveys. But the best practice is just to make sure that you have permission to do what you're doing. That's the best practice. And if you need assistance with that, please reach out to us and we can help find a person to contact. Or let you know if we've been in contact with that area before. So please feel free to reach out to us about that. There's a question about habitat types to survey in, Katie, specifically a question about hardwoods versus pine woodlands. Do we want surveys in a bunch of different habitat types, and might they be useful for bumblebees?
Yes, so likely you're going to find less bumblebees if you're somewhere deep in a forest, right? They're going to be a little bit more abundant in open grassland areas, but there are some species that like those woodland edges. But certainly any data from different types of habitat is very useful for us to help complete that picture of what bumblebees are using on the landscape or where they're existing or anything like that. So surveying in different types of habitats is very good information. You have anything to add?
I do not.
This is Bill. I might add that in the survey months of June through September, most of our woodlands have a closed canopy, and it's going to be hard to find something that's blooming enough to attract bumblebees unless it's been thinned or managed to keep it relatively open and there's some blooming plants there.
Yeah, it is hard to swing a net in a very densely vegetated area, including tall grass prairies. But it's part of the fun of going out there and trying to do it. I like the question of how do we get an Atlas project in another state? We are continuously looking to expand.
What state are you in?
Yes. If you didn't get a confirmation for the grid you selected, if you want to send me an email, I can double check that tomorrow and let you know. I'll put my email in the chat.
And if you, while Katie's doing that, if you happen to be traveling and you want to do a survey, you end up on lands where you can do a survey and you haven't adopted that grid cell and you want to conduct a survey, don't let having not adopted it be a barrier. It's just fine to do surveys wherever you want. Adopting a grid cell allows us to sort of track, allows you to sign up for the project so that we can keep you updated, and it allows us to track effort throughout the state. But if you're traveling and you want to do additional surveys without adopting it, or you just know you can do one survey and not two in there, please feel free to do that and submit your data. There's nothing, don't feel like it's a requirement to have to have adopted the grid cell to do a survey there. It's just a way for us to judge effort, and then sort of moving forward, we can say, okay, this area it's got enough interest, we can focus and try to draw people's attention to other parts of the state. But it's not like a requirement to do a survey there.
Yeah.
The one exception, I guess I would say, is in those grid cells that Katie mentioned in far eastern Missouri that are within the boundary of the rusty patched bumblebee. If you happen to be traveling there, I think I would just spend a little bit of time, doing some research and reading about that situation, so that we can, so we're following appropriate protocols in terms of handling an endangered species. And I just want to reiterate that please don't let that be a barrier to your participation either. The Fish and Wildlife Service fully recognizes that survey effort is the #1 need for that species, and they want people on the landscape looking for it. So they helped us develop this project in eastern Missouri and are supportive of it. So please don't let that be a barrier in that eastern part of the state. The information is tremendously valuable.
Yeah, there's another question on here. If we have not / cannot answer adopt a grid cell, I think you just removed that one.
Yeah, I was just answering that question.
Oh, I guess I interpreted it differently.
Oh,
but
sorry.
Maybe if someone was looking to adopt a grid cell that's already closed off and they can't adopt a grid cell or can't travel outside of that grid cell, and you want to still participate, use my email that I dropped in the chat and just reach out to me so that I can get you on our mailing list. We certainly don't want to turn anybody away. So if you can only adopt or you can only conduct surveys in that grid cell, we would certainly love to have you on still. Melinda's question. If we are in local proximity to the finalized ID site, are there volunteer opportunities to get in closer ID for local bumblebees in your area? I guess I'm not understanding your question, Melinda. If you want, I can unmute you if you want to try and describe it to us, or you can retype it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me? I believe I have enough by connection. I can put it
Yes.
in the chat.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I work with Sam Drogi a little bit, and you know, as you can see, offers a lot of volunteer time to be lab at the USGS site, and I didn't know if there was something more localized, Nebraska, Wyoming vicinity to be involved in.
So with like BID, is that what you're talking about?
You broke up. I'm so sorry. I live kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Are you talking about
Just being able to go and work closer ID, more specific ID. And I can ask this in an email. Maybe it's better.
Yeah. Why don't you send me an email and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Katie, can I add something on purchasing a net?
Yes.
Something that I've run into last year. So when you purchase a net, a lot of the ones you'll find online are solid muslin. You can't see through them. But if you can find one that's got some mesh, so you can see the bumblebee. So when you turn it up on in and that bumblebee comes to the top and you stick your hand in there with a vial, it's for me at least, it was a lot easier preventing myself from getting stung by being able to see where that bumblebee was and see where I had my hand with the vial. So try and make sure you get something that's got some mesh at the bottom. There's others. I've got another one here that's mostly mesh except for around the rim where it's reinforced with muslin. But I'd sure suggest that if you're looking for a net.
Yeah, those are very good points. I often forget to mention that because it's just hardwired in my brain now. But if you get a net that you can see through, it makes this a lot easier. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you have a good time participating.